And coming up on this week's show, are the government's infrastructure and industrial strategies actually strategies? And do they tell any kind of a positive story for rail? 1,800 people are evacuated from stranded Thameslink trains on the hottest day of the year. And new tube trains for the Piccadilly Line are, yes, delayed. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
Lots going on, Richard, so dive straight in, shall we? As we were preparing to record this week's show, a really important piece of breaking news reached Green Signals really at the last minute, but we felt we had to share it. And Richard is going to tell us more.
I am. It's a letter that we've had sight of, and it's from a guy called Richard Goodman, who's the Director General for Rail Reform and Strategy. He's relatively new. He doesn't have a railway background. He's just joined the team at the DfT to lead on rail reform. And he sent it to a guy called Declan Collier, who is the chair of the Office of Rail and Road, so the regulator. And it's about open access. Now, I can already hear some people groaning, going, oh, not again. But this actually is really important.
Bear with us.
Bear with us. It's not a short letter, it's quite punchy, but it raises the ante, if you like. It moves the debate on, and I'll give you an idea of that. So it talks about, it's clear that the ORR the Department for Transport are increasingly concerned about this, what feels like almost like a wave of new open access.
Rattled even, you might say.
Well, you could absolutely say that. And he makes the point in this letter, Mr. Goodman, that open access must genuinely add value, not simply divert revenue from existing operations or inhibit efficient operation of the network, i.e. not have a detrimental performance impact. We've heard all that before, right? So that is not new. But then he says, now more than ever, given the constrained financial environment, it's really, really important you kind of listen to what we have to say and take account of the Secretary of State's concerns and financial constraints. So it's kind of saying, post the spending review, it has got more challenging. You've really got to listen to it. What's really interesting, Nigel, is that it goes on to explain why they're concerned about performance and the West Coast and the East Coast main lines. Again, none of that's particularly new. But then he kind of moves it on quite significantly. And it says this. It says, up to this point, in determining the outcome of open access applications, ORRs largely consider the level of absolute abstraction based upon where ORR's analysis places a new application within the range of applications that have been approved in the past. In other words, you're always looking in the rear view mirror. You're looking at a new one, given where the new one might have been based on what you've done in the past, right?
Okay.
And then he says this ignores the fiscal environment of the day, right? And any additional constraints that the railway and the Secretary of State may have been placed upon, been placed under since early decisions were taken. In other words, you can't look in the rearview mirror. You've got to look at where we are and what might be coming. And he then talks about the cumulative impact of all of these applications. And
there are a lot of them, aren't there?
And there are a lot of them. And, like it's in your own life, really. You kind of go, well, I'd go and spend 50p on that, £1 on that. And in their own isolated cases, it doesn't feel that bad. And then you kind of look back at your spending at the end of the week. Oh, gosh. Oh, crikey. I've just blown the budget.
Your bank statement comes, yeah.
The bank statement comes. That's kind of what he's alluding to. He's saying, look, actually, it's really quite serious. And he actually says, if you look at all the live open access applications at the moment, it would actually cost 229 million in abstracted revenue. So in other words, take each one on their own, you can maybe make a case. Take them all together, you absolutely can't. However, it's this section that really sort of blew my mind a bit. Because he said, I would also take this opportunity to flag concern over the potential for conflict of interest between owning groups' contracted operations and their open access arms, a risk which only increases as contracts approach their end and attention shift towards new open access applications. Right? We're already seeing a number of applications that, if approved, would put an open access operator in direct competition with contracted services operated by the same owning group. So, for example, if you're Avanti West Coast, part owned by First Group, The guy who's the managing director there, reports into First Group. Lumo are looking to operate services to Stirling and potentially applying to go to Rochdale and all the rest of it. That's First Group. It's a conflict of interest, right? How can you do that? So they're flagging that up. And I've not seen that before. I mean, and it is really quite, not say brutal, but it's very direct language and quite hostile language, actually. So very, very important moment.
So what's the story there, Richard? It depends which lens you look through it. I mean, you made a comment there about as the conflict as existing arrangements come to an end. So let's just take West Coast. So is the open access application simply a way of trying to hang on in the new world where you won't be able to bid for franchises to lucrative chunks of the passenger business? Does this collectively represent the owning group somehow trying to thwart privatisation by finding ways to hang on to chunks of the passenger network, which they want to keep going, presumably just to keep making money?
Well, I think open access has always been fundamentally about sort of cherry picking lucrative parts of the network. Yes, it's also delivered some services to new destinations. No one's ever denied that.
No.
But it's also about... it is about cherry picking. So thwart nationalisation? No, I don't think so, because they can't do that. That ship sailed. But definitely kind of grab onto bits that are of considerable value. And I think the fact there are so many of these at the moment,
at this particular moment,
is indicative of that. I wondered, Nigel, when I read this, I thought, flipping it, that's pretty aggressive. There's a little bit of me kind of wonders whether it actually shows a bit of vulnerability as well. And there's a little bit of an element of they do protest a bit too much. Because if you thought that the ORR were going to do what you wanted them to do and not approve any of these applications, why would you need to write this? I wonder whether they're actually concerned.
Bit of desperation.
And there's just a bit of that you come across it just feels as if it might be a little bit desperate. I don't know, but that thought had occurred.
And if it is, the owning groups are pretty sharp. They will sense that immediately and sniff some blood in the water, won't they?
Sniff some weakness, absolutely. Yeah. So it's raised the ante. It's definitely put tanks on someone's lawns, if you want to call it that. I suspect it won't go down particularly well, but I wonder also whether it does suggest that there is actually now some genuine concern. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I've not seen a letter quite like
and they certainly clearly believe, or they're clearly aware that the ORR might not do what they want to do. And although there are new elements to it, like you said about the cumulative impact of all these applications, which is new, let's not forget Heidi Alexander's letter said virtually all the same things a few months ago, didn't she? Because we featured that on the show. So, it's repetition again with a few new elements, which adds to that sense of they're a bit rattled, panicky, unsettled. Choose your adjective of choice.
Richard Goodman starts this letter by saying, I want to reiterate exactly what the Secretary of State said in January, right? But it does add some new elements. The conflict of interest point is definitely new. Not seen that before. The cumulative effect, I actually think it's quite a valid point.
It's very valid.
Relatively new. It just raises the temperature.
Yeah.
It's out of the playbook of get your attack in first. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens next.
Can I ask a question? Where's Alex Hines in all this?
Well, I don't know. I did wonder, why has this come from Richard Goodman? And then I kind of dismissed that really because I thought,
it does say reform in his title.
It does say reform, and this is about reform. So I don't think there's anything in that. I think it's probably come from the person who wasn't around on January the 6th, but is around now. And this is very much in their bailiwick in terms of reform. So I think that makes sense.
I just wonder if it might have carried real clout or whether this would have been counterproductive. I'm thinking on my feet here, if it had been sent in joint names, like the famous Coucher shooter letter about electrification in 2008, had a real impact.
It did,
because it made a very powerful point from two well-respected individuals who were in very clear positions,
but in very different organisations.
But it was I'm talking about the principle of a joint letter.
Yeah, personally, I think it is what it is because it's come from the department. But we'll have to watch this. We'll see what the reaction is. I think this is a starting gun, not the finishing line.
Yes, indeed. And there will doubtless be reactions. So if you have one, let us have it. And I think there'll be quite a strong one. And we certainly want to hear from the owning groups, won't we, Richard?
Indeed.
We will bring you that reaction as we get it, and we will look at it and objectively analyse it. But for now, quite the story. So moving on. Well, the phrase "you wait for ages for a bus and then half a dozen come along at once" has proven to be quite apt in terms of government announcements recently that impact on our railway. We've had spending review, talked about it last week, the Stewart review linked to an interim report on the HS2 project reset by Chief Exec Mark Wilde, and an announcement in Parliament by Secretary of State Heidi Alexander, a 10-year UK infrastructure strategy and a UK industrial strategy. And I understand there are more to come. More strategies than you could shake a stick at. Richard, I know you've had some fun reading all this stuff, and these official documents are meat and drink to you, as we know. But surely you must be feeling a bit overwhelmed by this tsunami of paper or PDFs or whatever.
There's a lot of volume, that's for sure. I mean, first things first, although we will chat about the statement that the Secretary of State made in Parliament about HS2 following the Stewart review and the Mark Wilde letter, all the rest of it. What we're not going to do today is go through the Stewart review. Why? It is such, I have read it. It is a really important document. But we've actually got a real treat coming for Green Signals listeners, which I know is a bit of a tease, but we'll come back to that. Watch this space, as they say. But we can talk about the others. And I'm afraid, I don't want to sound sort of too overly skeptical, but there's limited good news, although that could be partly because the government does keep teasing us with stuff and saying, oh, by the way, there's more detail coming. So that actually is a bit frustrating.
Okay, so we went through the spending review last week, and if I recall, Richard, your key takeaways, just to prove I was listening, with the resource DEL day-to-day spending, which includes subsidy to support train services, will fall in real terms 5% every year. Savings thanks to nationalisation, that I think we're all sceptical about. Capital funding maintained for TRU, EWR and HS2, although the latter is looking like it's been reprofiled. And plenty of funding for mayoral combined authorities, but not much else that's new.
I think that's a pretty fair summary. The problem is we don't have all the detail yet. So I can't tell you exactly how the department's resource and capital limits sort of break down into individual things. And it's not made any easier, really, with all these new strategies. But it's probably worth starting with this 10-year infrastructure strategy, right? So they've been promising this for a long time. Big headlines, £725 billion of capital investment over 10 years. All sounds good stuff. Now, there are some really interesting bits in this, Nigel. So here's one really positive point, I think. We're promised a new approach to mega projects, which is obviously dead important in the context of things like HS2. So, for instance, it says this, and I'm not going to read this all out because it's people will lose the will to live, and we'll put a link to the strategy on our website. But this is in sections 1.34, 1.34 if you like, 1.35. And it says this: given the scale and complexity of mega projects, and it says HS2, Dreadnought, Sizewell C, the Office for Value for Money has developed a bespoke approach to funding and governance that will be implemented for current and future mega projects. And it includes things like a strategy and delivery plan, which would be published and laid as a command paper in Parliament, which will ensure all stakeholders are aligned on what the project is trying to achieve and how it will achieve it, right? Not a daft point.
But shouldn't we be doing that anyway? Yeah.
Well, that's fair. And then it says, second, mega projects will have streamlined decision-making processes, which ensure people with necessary expertise are able to make decisions, right? Third, projects will be given staged incremental funding as the design is developed and uncertainty and risk is reduced.
All makes sense.
4, mega projects that move into construction will be given a fixed capital envelope for the entirety of the project, supported by an annually managed expenditure budget. And then it says 5, delivery bodies will be granted automatic freedom to determine pay, for specialist roles that require skills not typically held by civil servants. This will enable a government to recruit and retain the necessary specialist expertise. And I kind of read that. I thought, yeah, there's a bit of kind of word soup in there. But actually, if you distill that down and they do it, that approach to mega projects could be quite a constructive one.
Well, yeah, it could, but none of it takes account of the fact of the massive increases in inflation, which have torpedoed any kind of planning now. And about pay for specialist roles, if you delve back in history, there was an almighty fuss when it was the Ministry of Transport, I guess, agreed to pay Richard Beeching £24,000 a year to sort out BR, and that was exactly the same principle, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most ridiculous things you've heard said, and it started, I think, with David Cameron actually in 2010, was, nobody should be paid more than the Prime Minister, which was wonderfully forgot the fact that when the Prime Minister stopped being the Prime Minister, he'd probably earned 10, 20, 30 million pounds on the writing his memoirs and going on the speaking circuit. So it was such a stupid comment, right? And, the James Stewart review does look into this issue. In the end, you've got to get the right expertise. So if they're able to do that, that's a positive thing.
Well, I did like that first point about a strategy and delivery plan will be published and laid as a command paper, that quote that you gave there about aligned stakeholders. Lesson from HS2, perhaps, in terms of the confusion between speed and capacity, because the way the government positioned that at the start, I was there, was appalling. And it allowed that to take root, that it was just about carving a few minutes off the journey to Birmingham for wealthy businessmen, and of course it never was.
They got the messaging of that really wrong, didn't they? I mean, arguably, if you read the strategic outline business case for HS2, it does say that, it does explain all that, but it was never, I think if you formally put this in front of Parliament as a command paper and it says this is why we're doing it, and you're really clear right from the outset, then that's got to help. So that was the new approach to mega projects is quite good. There's a whole section in this infrastructure strategy on something called spatial planning. Spatial planning is important because the government's got an objective, a vision of a lot of house building. Well, that's great, but there's no point doing that if you don't also have a strategy to get all the communications to them, energy in terms of power connections, water, waste, and transport, right? So spatial strategy, spatial planning says basically let's look at all of this as a big thing. That's a good thing. So, right, that's fine. There's also a big discussion on PPPs, public-private partnerships, and reintroducing private capital or introducing private capital. The language here is very careful. Right, they're very obviously PFI, and
we all remember last time, don't we?
And they don't go down terribly well with a certain kind of perhaps Labour voter, right? So the language is very careful, but they're also talking about diversification of revenue streams. So my line, there's only two sources of money.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what the government's trying to say in this strategy, well, there might be more actually, such as land value capture. Again, these are actually quite positive points to set out in a strategy.
So where's the catch?
Well, what one catch is great words. Where's the detail? Where's the action?
Where's the beef?
And there's a common theme. There always seems to be this. There's always more to come. So even in this infrastructure strategy, it says, and we're going to be setting out our plans for Northern Powerhouse Rail, for instance, in the next few weeks. Why can't you set it out now? Why teasers and then not do it? That's a bit frustrating. There's also going to be a pipeline, a portal, if you like, which is going to be set up by NISTA, which is the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority.
Okay.
Basically, the thing that John Armitt used to run, but sort of combined with something else to be this big body that will have a portal where you will be able to go and look and see where all the money is going to be spent on these projects. But that's not coming till July. So, again, a bit frustrating. I suspect somebody just wanted to get as many bites of the cherry as possible. There's one bit that will make you absolutely howl with laughter, Nigel. In section 1.42, where it talks about spatial planning, there's a table that sets out a summary of spatial.
I saw that.
Did you see this? As spatial and investment plans for key sectors. And under transport, it says for rail,
This is
Control period CP, great, we know about that.
This is I did see this. Go on.
And Rail Network Enhancement Pipeline, the RNEP, and it says CP7 runs until 2029. CP8 is in development. RNEP, the enhancement pipeline, updated on a rolling basis.
Very slow roll.
It got published once in 2019 and has not been published since. It's not updated on a rolling basis. So you think
it was intended to be on an annual basis.
Oh, yeah. We had that slot where we talked about this, where Sir Andrew Haynes actually said in front of the Transport Select Committee, and you probably shouldn't publish it because it's just a political device. I mean, and yet here's the Treasury saying we do this every year. No, you don't. So
do they not know, or are they being mischievous? I don't know which is worse.
Well, I don't know either. I think I probably just slipped through. There was an intention to do it, and it hasn't happened. But it's not the biggest point in the world.
No,
but it just makes them look a bit daft, really.
Stupid.
Yeah.
So what's the summary then, Richard? It feels like it may not be as bad as we first feared, though it is frustrating when there are so many gaps and stupid mistakes such as the RNEP.
Yeah. The enhancement pipeline, absolutely. Look, there are elements of this that does feel like a strategy. And you could take, if you want to take a very positive outlet, say, at least they've published it, right? And,
well, that's true.
And, it sets out I mean, we don't like roadmaps with railways for obvious reasons, but it does kind of set out a roadmap. I wish we didn't have to wait for all the really gutsy detail. And obviously there's still stuff on Northern Powerhouse Rail to come. But on the downside, for rail, there really isn't much in the infrastructure strategy that we didn't already know.
No, there isn't. So let's move on to the industrial strategy. This presumably sits above infrastructure because infrastructure is just one part of it. Does it offer any extra comfort for rail here?
Yeah, can I just pull you up one bit because it's the UK's modern industrial strategy. I
stand corrected.
Yeah. Well, it's quite dramatic looking, right? So it's got a cover that I think looks like a bit of a weird mashup between, remember that film Tron and The Matrix? It's kind of,
really?
It's very colourful. It is really quite, it's not quite my thing, but I kind of see what they're trying to do. They're talking about because the strategy talks about key areas that they want to invest in. And it's like, it's tech industries and life sciences and all that. So they're trying to say, tech modernity, all the rest of it. That's fine. It's worth a read. Again, we'll put a link to it on the site. From a rail point of view, let's just focus on that. It's a bit of a disappointment, if I'm honest. So the word rail or railway gets mentioned, I think, something like 22 times, but throughout the entire document. But it's mainly in reference to, guess what? Things that are actually already. So Trans-Pennine route upgrade, the 25 billion for HS2, East-West Rail. Yeah, they're all there, but they're all mentioned elsewhere. I think the real disappointment is there's nothing I could find that really talks about the contribution, the enabling contribution that rail, and especially things like rail freight, makes to the industrial base and the economy of the country. And I just felt, what a lost opportunity, really.
They just
so
don't think of
more
it,
lobbying to do. I don't think they do think of it. So there's more work to be done there.
One thing I thought interesting is that while various rail interest groups have been warm, even if it's Luke, towards a spending review and the infrastructure strategy, they were much more muted when it came to the industrial strategy, weren't they? Some little subtleties like the Railway Industry Association welcomed the infrastructure strategy, but only noted the industrial strategy. These things matter.
Yeah, and if you actually look, it's a very, very fair observation. I've actually got the Railway Industry Association's comment here, and it was echoed by others. They actually say, whilst there is some mention in the industrial strategy for rail, and we and our members welcome the direction of the government's recent spending review and infrastructure strategy, we remain concerned that this industrial strategy, I've just added industrial there, does not include transport and rail as significant enablers to growth, either for the 8 specific sectors mentioned or for the economy more widely. I kind of, I do actually take that point, and obviously the tens of thousands of people that are employed in the industry and the gross value add that it generates, none of that's really mentioned in the industrial strategy.
We're really bad at that gross but extra value, aren't we, on everything about in plans and all these things. All right, let's talk briefly about HS2, shall we? We'll go through this in a lot more detail when we look at that very important James Stewart review. But we've had an interim report from Mark Wilde, HS2's chief exec, and a statement from the SOS in the Commons, the Secretary of State.
The SOS.
It's what the SPADs and press officers often refer to. What's in the SOS's diary, Anyway, What do they tell us?
Yeah, when I was a kid and somebody I did something wrong, I used to go soz. I don't know that. I just think of the word sorry. Anyway,
yeah, okay.
We get distracted, right? So, well, let's start with the Mark Wilde letter.
Yeah, let's.
It's about 5 pages long. It's an interim report, and it's dated the 31st of March. So it was clearly something that fed into the spending review, right? In the letter, Mark doffs his cap to some of the highlights of progress on HS2 so far. I think that's smart because there's an awful lot of people busting the gut every day. But he also says the position that he inherited is unacceptable because the organisation has failed in its mission to control costs and deliver to schedule. Now, they're clearly not the only one involved in that, and we'll come back to that in due course. It's also very important to note, Nigel, that the numbers in his letter are all at Q3, Q3 2019 prices.
There may be trouble ahead. More bad news to come.
Well, there will, because when it gets rebased at current prices, there's quite a lot of inflation to take account of, which I'm sure many will spin as yet another example to hit it over the head with. And you can't really blame HS2 or, arguably even the government really for sort of global economic movements that have impacted on inflation. But yeah, you're right. I think there's a bit more of that to come yet. What Mark does identify, though, in this interim report are the 3 primary reasons that he believes have caused the problems today and which are enduring on HS2. The construction commenced too soon, the contracting model has not delivered performance, and HS2 Limited itself is not set up to actively manage delivery. They're 3 quite big things, and we will pick all those up when we look at the James Stewart review because he addresses those points.
It's all good stuff, Richard, but what's missing, as I see it, in all that is any suggestion that the government itself may be partly the issue. I see that Mark helps us here. He says in his letter, our operating environment within government is beyond the scope of this letter, but issues related to decision-making, political pressures, scope changes on northern sections, annual funding constraints and assurance have been highlighted in other reports. Critically, the instability in the scope and funding has made it difficult to lock down credible plans, and we'll need to work together on this to align going forward. Careful choice of words all there, Richard, I think. Mark also sets out a possible way forward, which he says would involve a reset of the day one railway operating model, a commercial formula that can reset the relationship with the supply chain, a new HS2 organisation, and a reset of our relationship with government. Each one of those sounds impressively complex. Never mind all 4. Is all this even possible?
It's a monumental task. You're right. Each one of those, we'll just have a new HS2 organisation. That of itself would fox, some seriously impressive people on its own. And they've got to do all of those 4 things whilst they're keeping momentum going on delivery on the ground, right? And we know how that can sometimes be affected when organisations, for instance, start to change. It's really going to be challenging. And the new leadership team of Mike Brown, who Secretary of State has appointed as chair, and Mark Wilde, massively have their work cut out. I mean, answering your question specifically, I'm not normally, you're going to be surprised, I'm not normally a half empty kind of guy. But I can see the shock on your face.
I am.
I would say we'll be rooting for them because we need them to succeed. But I think the odds are against them to be able to do all that, swiftly. Maybe that's why we're talking about a bit of an extended timescale just to get the stuff done.
Huge task because the HS2 has become even more so a just watchword for incompetence, messed up projects. Wherever you're looking with people writing about it these days, it's just
rightly or wrongly,
much, much worse. And that takes us neatly and finally onto the Secretary of State, SOS statement to the House on 18th of June, bringing the threads of all this together. What did she say, Richard? And did it inspire confidence, not least in you?
Well, she she took the opportunity, she said, to draw a line in the sand.
Oh,
I mean, there were
God.
loads of other cliches on. There was one phrase in a statement where it was literally like sort of 4 cliches after another.
BS bingo.
And she understandably, I think, took the opportunity to dump as much as she could on the last government. There was a lot of that. Although you can only really do that once, can't you? Yeah. Mind you, since the opening date is, beyond the next election, you could also be a bit cynical and say she's hardly likely to be sort of held account for it at the next election either. I think there's an interesting thing here. And I all wish Mike Brown and Mark Weil the best. But one of the things that was interesting, she talked about bringing the team together that delivered Crossrail, for instance, right? Which incidentally, by the way, went through exactly the same process. There was a time when everybody hated Crossrail. Yeah. It was a watchword for incompetence, delay, cost spiraling out of control. Now look at it. I mean, you just you won't find anybody who's a detractor.
Can't imagine life without it.
No. And the one person actually who came in 2020, because Mike Brown left Transport for London in 2020, and came into Crossrail in 2020 and got it open by 2022, was Andy Byford, of course. So it's remarkable how there's all these people who apparently deliver Crossrail. There's actually one missing, in my opinion. But hey, look, we really do need them to succeed, so let's hope they can.
And did we learn anything from what was said in the debate following a statement? You're smiling. No. That's a no. Then. Right, okay. I have to ask the question, Richard.
It was brilliant. I mean, there were some sensible comments, but by and large, it was just like a kind of a queue of backbenchers wanting to talk about why they felt aggrieved about it or how they'd pointed out all along that it was going to be a disaster. And Nigel Farage's comments are quite interesting in that regard. So no, it was just the usual, really. Shout out to Ruth Cadbury, MP, chair of the Transport Select Committee. She at least acknowledged the tremendous work that HS2 has done in skills and training development. And actually, the Secretary of State was gracious in her acceptance of that point. So, that was, but by and large, it was kind of what you would expect, really.
So anything that's changed your mind on HS2 as a result of all this?
Well, the principle of it, no. I still believe, we have no solution to the capacity constraints that we've got on the network that HS2 would have resolved. We may work out what they are in due course, but today we haven't, right? So the principle of HS2, no, not at all. I haven't changed my view one iota. I do think, though, that the way it's been done has been pretty appalling, and literally nobody will come out of this with great credit, really. But we probably need to save that for when we look at the James Stewart review.
I do recall a period, probably 10 years or more ago, talking to people very often on the inside of HS2, as I did, who were massively frustrated when all this was starting to go wrong in perception terms and wanted to get out there. And they were told by the DfT, you keep quiet, you say nothing.
So there you go. So I don't think anybody gets a big gold star, frankly. But as I say, we need to look at that when we look at the James Stewart review.
And I'm looking forward to that. Now Excellent. We move on to a story that gave us some dramatic headlines over the weekend. And that's the evacuation of 1,800 passengers from stranded trains in London on the hottest day of the year because of a fault on a Thameslink train. It couldn't really have happened on a worse day for passengers, could it, Richard? Walking down the tracks in 30-degree midday heat.
No, not really. I suppose storms, might have just beaten it, but it certainly didn't result in headlines that I think Gavir Thameslink Rail, GTR would have been happy with. No.
So we asked GTR to tell us what happened, and they said that at about 10:40 on Saturday, June 21st, a Class 700 lost a contact shoe near Loughborough Junction and came to a stand. This train and 2 others nearby were stranded outside stations. Then, after consideration of all options, the decision was taken to evacuate the passengers along the track. However, at least one service was full and standing, so it took time to get the resources on site to ensure this could be done safely, because there were 1,800 passengers in total who needed to be detrained and safely evacuated. Network Rail pulled in personnel from across Kent and Sussex, along with support from London Fire Brigade and the BTP. First two trains were evacuated by 12:23 and a third by 13:10, so some people were on trains for 2.5 hours, no opening windows, no power, no aircon on the hottest day of the year. There's clearly more to this, Richard, but it's happened before, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when we say there's more to it, I think that we need to understand what happened, what decisions were taken, what the response time were, and could any of those things, be approved. There is a serious incident review going on, and that's going to take place. Apparently, we asked GTR to confirm how long this would take, and they couldn't give us a definitive answer. Maybe they can't. I don't know. It's a bit frustrating, but with this serious incident review, we will expect it to look at what was the decision-making process during the incident, where were resources drawn from, where could improvements be made, could it all have been done quicker, so on and so forth. It's about learning for the future, clearly, and that's really important because everybody expects, I think, that occasionally things will go wrong. It's how you respond on the day and how you learn for the future that matters. GTR did give us this statement. They said, this would have been a difficult and uncomfortable experience for our passengers, which is a bit of an understatement, isn't it, really? And we are truly sorry. With safety our top priority, the safest place was to remain on the trains while we worked our hardest to get help to those on board. Okay, but we need to understand then what the end-to-end process was.
It's a time taken, isn't it? 2.5 hours and all that. I mean, it's happened before. I've done countless or quite a few media interviews about the Channel Tunnel where a train has broken down. You know where it is. Why can you not send an engine in to pull it out? And I struggle. I know there's couplings issues and all the rest of it, but to detrain 1,800 passengers and tramp them along the ballast.
Yeah.
And the station's not far away. Why can we not find a way to get some kind of locomotive to drag them into the stations? That must theoretically take a less amount of time than getting them all off the train.
Well, Loughborough Junction is quite a challenging location.
I know. I know it's a simplistic comment, but
I think it might work in some instances, not in others. I think I understand the frustration. I think what we do need to do is see the outcome of the serious incident review as quick as possible and see how they're going to learn the lessons.
Okay. All right. But this sort of story's happened time and again, and there's got to be a better way of doing it. I think we can agree on that. Now, this next one, excuse me, feels a bit like it's a case of Transport for London trying to sugarcoat bad news. Perish the thought. Is that unfair, Richard?
It does feel a bit that way, Nigel, actually. This is the Piccadilly Line story. So TfL put out a press release saying that state-of-the-art Piccadilly Line trains are to begin operating in 2026. It then went on to tell us how brilliant they'll be.
However,
and look, let's not mock them. They will be brilliant, right? There's no question about that. But towards the end of the release, there's an admission that, of course, the date is later than had been originally planned. So the new trains that are being built by Siemens were meant to be in service by the end of this year, 2025. Now they're saying second half of next year. Now that could be anything, I suppose, from July, which is 6 months late, to the end of December, which is 12 months late, right? So we don't actually know. Now, Steph and I went to see the facility in Goole recently. It's breathtaking. It's brilliant, right? And the trains do look and are going to be amazing, right? And we're going to be publishing a video on them very soon. And Siemens couldn't actually have been more open, more helpful. They were really terrific. But they are complicated, right? So, they've got the first deep tube trains to have air conditioning and walk-through carriages, which, my background at London Underground, we finally got to a point that I believe 20 odd years ago might be not possible to achieve. So that is terrific.
So what's behind the delay then? Are we back to your point about new trains just being too complicated? Or your question?
Yes, I think that is a very fair question. TfL's press release said that their introduction, this quote, involves engineering challenges in designing, building, and introducing the new trains onto one of the deepest and longest lines on the network. It's true, while ensuring they are fully integrated with London Underground infrastructure. Now, the first unit has actually been on test for a few months, and TfL say that this is identified it is more complex than expected. So the start of a rigorous program of testing the interactions with the infrastructure and systems has had to be rescheduled. Right? They also say that all mitigations or design alterations will be incorporated into future trains. Now, interestingly, the chief capital officer of TfL, a chap called Stuart Harvey, was quoted in the Evening Standard, and he made some points that are worth noting. He said, "It's a brilliant new train. It's stretched the engineering expertise of Siemens and TfL, but there is no fault on the train." He said, "The train's done 15,000 kilometres on the test track. It does what it says on the tin, but the test track is a test track. It's not going to exactly mimic
Everyday
what it
working
faces when it's out on the
conditions.
railway." Exactly, yeah, that's a fair comment. And he says the train's working perfectly fine as designed, but there's some slight redesign required to make sure we get the right things and get things in the right place. And he does make a very interesting point that what they're really keen to have is a standardized train potentially for the Piccadilly, Bakerloo, Central, and Waterloo and City lines, although that's obviously not that important, the last one. And they did that with the S stock, the subsurface stock, didn't they? So, there's some logic in that. And he said nothing we've seen so far has knocked our confidence in that at all, but nonetheless, there's still work to do.
As you said, the S-stock trains built by Bombardier as was on the subsurface lines weren't introduced without incident, were they? Didn't a good number of them end up going back to works for modifications not long after their introduction? And the comment you made in your other a bit earlier about aircon on the deep tubes sounds to me an interesting thing to look at, because is that not just a recipe for more and more heat in the deep tubes? If you're sucking it out the trains and...
Well, the train creates a piston effect, doesn't it? So that may be one of the challenges. I mean, of course, the new DLR trains have also been delayed. They were meant to be in service in April 2024. Now it's looking like towards the end of this year. But so there are big challenges with new trains. At our recent trip to Stadler, we talked to Stadler about this, if you recall, and we'll be getting our video out on that soon. But look, it is a challenge. We all accept it's a challenge. I'm sure nobody sat there kind of thinking, "Oh, we better get around to this at some point." I'm sure people are working really hard. But yeah, have we made them a bit complicated? Probably.
And again, it's not new, is it? I do recall sitting across the table at the Shadow Strategic Rail Authority before your appointment, talking to your predecessor, the illustrious Sir Alistair Morton, who was fizzing about, why can we not make these blooming new trains work straight out the box? And spoiler, he didn't say blooming.
No. And it's not that straightforward, but the frustration is understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. And it's a heck of a list this week. First of all, our thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. And then, deep breath, Nige, a big thank you to everyone who's left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you all are Peter Curtis, Brian G, John Kirkman, Andrew Seddon, Alan Kirkman, Chris Exley, Mark Woods, Caroline Cleveley, Roland Harmer, Sean Harris, Nigel Mapston, Stuart Hamilton, Graham Whitley, Walter Fillingham, Alistair Rutledge, Trevor Stone, Roy Tate, Graham Webster, Bob Walsh, Ashley Hughes, and Andy Chase. Thank you so much for supporting us with super thanks. We couldn't do what we do without your support, but why such a big list this week, Richard? Have you any ideas?
Yes, I do. And you know exactly why, because on our Raw and Uncut show, which we do for members, I recounted the tale of the fact that I had an encounter with a seagull on the bridge in Chippenham. And let's just say I came off worse from a great height. Right? And people thought that was hilarious and wanted to support us. I'm not quite sure. I mean, maybe I should just go and do it again. But there you go. But look, likewise, we really do appreciate it. We couldn't do anything as much as we do without the brilliant support of our members. We've had 2 wonderful members upgrade their membership from silver to gold this week. So thanks to Stephen Hutton and Andrew Franks. You can see all of our members and our supporters. We list them in the credits at the end of the show. If you're a gold or silver member, usual plea, please do drop us a line to info@greensignals.org with your postal address, because you do get some goodies. But thank you for your support. It's much appreciated.
You really did take one for the team then, Richard. Maybe we need to arrange for you to trip up, fall in the canal or whatever at some point in the future.
Thank you so much.
It's okay. It's full of creative ideas.
Yeah.
And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. This is one I was disappointed to miss, Richard, and I think you would have been too. Last weekend, June 19 to 22nd, the wonderful Ffestiniog Welsh Highland Railway, well, the Ffestiniog Railway actually, ran a Platinum Jubilee weekend to mark the 70th anniversary of passenger trains running in the preservation era. It was a huge weekend of celebrations with a reenactment of the first train to run on the line in 1955 and a host of other nods to the history of the Ffestiniog. Sunday's grand finale was truly special, though, with a 200 wheels on the cob cavalcade. The entire Ffestiniog and Welsh Highland Railway fleet, whether in steam or not, took to the cob, and the footage from the event says it all. I think there was a commentary by Tim Dunn and Anthony Cools from the NRM.
There was.
I would have loved to have been there for that, but sadly it just wasn't possible.
No, likewise. I mean, I think I saw some comment as well that said there's going to be a lot happening with Railway 200 this year, but that set the bar pretty high. So you just know it would have been, just given the quality of the team there. But yeah, really sorry to have missed that. But pictures look amazing. Now, another important bit of news this week. Southeastern Railway and Network Rail have united. They united on June the 18th to now operate as a single leadership team known as Southeastern Railway. Now, of course, Southeastern was already in public ownership, as has been Network Rail for a while, but this is bringing the operator into the Great British Railways way of running. So Managing Director Steve White will run the combined team.
And what a great bloke he is. That's going to be really interesting to watch, isn't it?
Absolutely. There was an interesting comment in their press statement where they said Southeastern Railway is a contractual arrangement between Southeastern and Network Rail. No accountabilities are being transferred, and each organisation will remain responsible for decision-making for its respective accountabilities. I'm guessing that's a legal safety case issue. But knowing Steve the way we do, he will run that team as one team. And good power to his elbow.
Steve's a class act, and he's always active on Twitter and responds to any criticism. And he very, very funny tweet when all this was on. He said the only thing he objects to is being described as a fat controller. He can live with everything else.
Yeah, and I share his pain. I suffered the same thing. But anyway, keep going, Steve.
Keep going, Steve. You have our best wishes. Anyway, thanks to Steve Roberts for sending us this one. The Severn Valley Railway shareholders have voted overwhelmingly in favour of what's called, I've never heard of one of these, a special resolution authorising the company's conversion into a charitable community benefit society. The reason that's significant is because it will make the SVR eligible for new types of grant funding, and they'll be able to apply to HMRC for gift aid recovery on donations and probably some ticket sales, which is great. There'll be another vote in August to decide whether to amalgamate the existing company with the newly formed CCBS, which would obviously save a lot of costs by not having to duplicate things like accounting and auditing. And apparently the railway is due to reopen fully on July 25th after repairs following that very severe landslip earlier this year. So good news there, and well done on such a fast fix, I think, Richard.
It's absolutely cracking, that, isn't it? So, yeah, well done indeed. Now, there seem to be plenty of heritage stories for the round at this time, Nigel. This time, a little bit of drama at the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway's diesel gala over the weekend of the 21st and 22nd of June. During mid-afternoon on the second day, on a Sunday, a visiting Class 50 locomotive, 50021, derailed on the leading axle of the trailing bogie during a move into the head shunt at Keighley. Now, only a single axle was derailed, and the derailment occurred about 50 yards beyond the toes of the trailing point. So that, and we're told the trailing points did not contribute to or suffer damage in the incident. Now, because The derailment of the axle was into the forefoot of the siding, which is a non-running line.
It's a head shunt, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got maximum speed of 5 miles an hour, isn't it? It didn't encroach on the adjacent running line, which allowed the continuation of the planned timetable.
Thank goodness.
And they moved very fast and changed their rosters and all that kind of stuff. We understand that the derailment was caused by a localized failure of several sleepers under the lateral forces exerted by the passage of the locomotive, which allowed the gauge to spread a bit, sufficient for the leading right-hand wheel in the direction of travel to drop into the forefoot of the siding. There's no check rail fitted because it's not a passenger running line. Now, apparently, the locomotive was re-railed by jacking the derailed axle vertically, and then they put it back onto the rail, and then the track team used tie bars to pull back sections of track that had been widened by the derailment. Now, everything was done pretty quickly, and I think they got they released the 50 later that evening, and there was also a Class 70 from Freightliner that was sort of trapped behind it. There's the usual load of uninformed comment on social media, but also a great deal of praise for the professional and speedy manner that the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway managed the entire thing, and people saying, and it was a wonderful diesel gala. So, well done, guys. And, it sounds like you turned a tricky situation and turned it around with great professionalism. So that sounds good.
And a word of praise and doff of the cap to the guys who sorted the track out, because it occurred on that curve out of the station at Keighley. And there's a public footpath and a wall which gave a grandstand view to lots of people with camera phones. So those guys felt like they were working in a fish tank. Yeah. And I'm sure they were getting lots of uninvited comment over the wall.
And helpful advice. Yes.
I once had to help re-rail an errant derailed austerity in the platforms at Lakeside with people down both sides watching every move. And it's very stressful. So well done, chaps, keeping you cool and doing such a great job.
Indeed.
Nice little bit of HS2 news before we finish the roundup, Richard. Between Wednesday, June 18 and Friday, June 20th, engineers completed a deck slide. Another near Thorpe Mandeville in West Northamptonshire for the Lower Thorpe viaduct. It's the last of 5 similar double composite structures that's been slid into position by contractor EKFB, who must be expert at it now. The 1,300-ton viaduct deck is made of steel and concrete and stretches for 220 metres. It was assembled to one side before being slid into position, ready to eventually carry high-speed trains across Banbury Lane and help manage flood risk by ensuring rainwater can still run off into existing watercourses. And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any bits and pieces of news or big stories, little stories, please do. Make sure you send us your details, and if we use yours, we'll give you a name check on the programme.
We certainly will. And that means it's now time to do the quiz.
Hurrah, hurrah.
Now,
coiled springtime. Go on.
Oh, good. Right. Last week's question was this. It was deliberately a fairly straightforward one. Why, in railway terms, is the 18th of March, 1960 such an important date? So many of you got it so quickly. The answer, of course, is that date was the day that Class 9F, locomotive number 92220, is it? And however you say that with steam engines, was named Evening Star at Swindon, the last steam locomotive to be built for BR. As late as 1960, it's extraordinary, isn't it? So many of you got it. The winner, randomly chosen from all the correct answers we had, was Adrian Gould. So well done, Adrian. If you just send us an email, if you don't mind, to quiz@greensignals.org.
You make a good point there, Richard.
You.
Some of the 9S were only 4 years old when they were withdrawn for a locomotive and asset with a 30-year projected lifespan. And, of course, Evening Star was done in full Great Western Brunswick green with copper cap and all the rest of it.
Yes, indeed it was. Yeah, no, it's extraordinary. I'm not saying it's kind of just it is what it is,
but 4 years for those for many of some of those locomotives, just scandalous.
And there's the opinion there, ladies and gentlemen. It was scandalous, apparently. Right? Well, who knew?
Well, it was a waste of money. I mean, the Bullieds were rebuilt with projected scrapping dates in the 1970s. I mean, if we were doing this podcast back then, we'd have been having a field day.
Okay. No, fair point. Anyway, I'm going to move on quickly before we talk more about steam trains. So to this week's quiz. Okay. Again, I think a fairly straightforward one. Maybe. BR totems. You know the old station signs we used to have at the rail. You know the I call them like a lozenge shape. Anyway, the totem sign. They were different colours. How many different colours were there, and what did each colour denote? If you think you know the answer to that, then quiz at greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, June the 28th, after we'll put all the correct answers in a hat and select a winner at random to receive one of our very special quiz winners, Green Signals mugs.
They fetch fantastic sums occasionally at the auctions, do those?
Some of them, the rare ones,
yeah,
really do.
They absolutely do. We knew them in our train spotting days as sausages, but there you go.
Is that right?
Here's a fun, that Rosegrove indeed, Richard. Here's a fun one to end on. A new Thomas the Tank Engine documentary is going to receive its UK premiere at the Greatest Gathering in Derby on August the 2nd. An unlikely fandom, the impact of Thomas the Tank Engine, explores the enduring legacy and profound influence of the children's television series and marks the 80th anniversary of the Thomas franchise, which is when Wilbur Awdry started making the stories up for his son Christopher. It delves into the origins of the story and the global impact and passionate community of fans that have grown around it. If you're an existing ticket holder for the Greatest Gathering on August the 2nd, you can book a seat to watch the premiere in a 250-seat auditorium that Alstom's creating in one of Litchurch Lane's paint shops, paint booths. We'll stick a link in the additional resources for the episode on our website if you'd like to book. Brilliant. Love Thomas.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see an auditorium in a paint booth as well.
I know,
so that's going to be really interesting.
Well done, Alstom, for doing all
Indeed.
this. And sadly, that's all we got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. All you have to do is press the button. It's free. And if you really want to support us, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon, for which you get all sorts of cool stuff. But most importantly, please join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. And we'll see you then, hopefully. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a fantastic summer week.